So welcome. Thank you for joining me. And I will be speaking in English. So I'll speak slowly and clearly as well as I can. Today we're talking about the impact of COVID-19 on the security industry. I am Georgia Adele. I'm a consulting analyst with Frost & Sullivan in our security practice. Within security, my areas of focus have been around airport security and automation, access systems, including biometrics, sensors, and RFID, as well as drones and autonomous vehicle deployment. I look into technology trends, competitive and market intelligence, and I work on strategy development for our clients. So today we are looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the security industry and what that implies in terms of future opportunities. So we'll cover three areas: the global economy in COVID, which we will briefly touch on, followed by the impact of COVID on the security industry specifically, and focus in on the growth opportunities post-COVID. So we are all aware of the tremendous impact that COVID-19 has had on the world economy. In Frost analysis, world GDP growth has been negative for all 4 quarters of 2020, and will appear to have significant growth in Q2 of this year. And we're expecting that it will come back around the non-COVID scenario forecast by Q4 of this year. We've looked at 2 potential scenarios of how COVID-19 will impact the security industry. In the first, we see the public sector maintaining committed investments in the short term, but private sector will downsize and delay contracts. This illustrates a theme of security investments geared towards operational continuity over capability enhancement over the next 1 to 2 years. In other words, we'll see more companies spending to maintain operations in the form of investments to improve remote working and safety in shared spaces, rather than major upgrades to security capabilities. In the second scenario, we also see a reduction in security spending in the short to medium term, impacted by the decline of specific sectors. If you think of airports, theaters, live music venues, but this is offset by the investment in capabilities to address the rise in tech-enabled attacks. In the long term, we see spending cut by at least 10%. Futuristic programs and new acquisitions are most likely to be cut, and both the public and private sector will try to optimize their investments. So this chart shows the forecast for total security industry spending globally by scenario. So the light blue is pre-pandemic scenario, which was growth of about 7% per year. The next one is the prolonged recovery scenario. That's scenario 1 of the slide before, that has public sector maintaining spending and private sector downsizing and delaying. The focus on operational continuity rather than upgrades. And this will see almost all areas of spending witness a decrease. This is the expected scenario, considering the time that it's taking to implement vaccines and the ongoing outbreaks around the world. In the accelerated scenario, that is scenario 2 of the previous slide, a reduction in spending in short to medium term, offset by investment in counter tech attacks. Then certain subsegments are severely impacted, but some others just stagnate. So as I said, certain subsegments are impacted far more heavily than others because of the nature of the crisis. We know how the pandemic has devastated the aviation industry by crippling demand and curtailing operations. A pre-COVID CAGR of almost 12% was knocked down to less than 3% in the anticipated scenario. As airports and airlines are bringing back flights and trying to resume new normal operations, there's increased investment in creating low-touch environments. There was the pre-existing trend of airport automation already underway, but the lack of cash flow will mean that investment is very strategic, and other potential security upgrades that were planned will remain future goals for now. Similarly, for land, port, and mass transit, they're dealing with lower volumes, but it will not impact these segments as drastically as airports. The risk of contagion associated with mass transit may shift passengers to alternative mobility solutions, and this will create new security opportunities outside of the mass transit space, but this will not happen immediately, probably. Urban mobility is a space where there's a lot of exciting change happening, and physical security needs to be built into these systems and cities that they connect with. Oil and gas security is the only area that will not decrease investment in security in either scenario. And cyber security is a major area of investment for this segment. Banking and finance is another area to witness a significant drop in security expenditure. There's more spending going towards remote working capabilities and the security of those remote transactions. But banks were further along than many other industries in their digitalization processes. So spending will go to hardening those systems that were already in place. They'll take longer to get back to their pre-COVID budgets because they've had to stop and start recovery based on changing lockdowns, continued outbreaks, and the slowed customer interactions mean that they don't have the budget for big security upgrades until further along in the recovery. The pandemic has impacted supply chains in all industries, and security is no exception. In terms of system integrators, the lack of new projects from OEMs limits how service-oriented suppliers can reach end users. There could be a shift towards in-house integration to limit outside personnel. One simple example is the physical security personnel required on site and the greater reliance on technology. For example, we saw a rapid adoption of handheld thermometers at shops and restaurants, and then that quickly is giving way to the automated thermal cameras that require fewer staff and can be operated at a greater distance from customers. We also witnessed multi-country manufacturing disruptions earlier in the year with factory closures. Beyond that, slower demand can put upward pressure on commodity prices. In terms of extended project timelines, as I mentioned, airports have been seriously impacted by COVID-19 with many program timelines extended. There's also 5G spectrum auctions in Portugal, Austria, Spain, France that were planned for April 2020 that were all delayed for later in the year. And so that will potentially shift later auctions as well. And of course, the Tokyo Olympics are a prominent example of extended project deadlines because that postponement will shift all major event security and additional security projects by over a year to accommodate the new Olympic timeline. Another major impact is on downstream distributor availability. It's equally possible that we see a lack of local projects or that local projects pull local distributors away from OEM projects. There's been a serious impact on demand for security investment. One consequence of the pandemic is that government will be the group most able to allocate new security contracts. Government agencies are demanding data analysis and public safety and response coordination. On the other hand, private security contracts will decline as firms focus on internal operations. So new contracts are more likely to focus on maintenance, support, and small-scale upgrades. With the huge shift to remote working environments, remote and cloud access are incredibly important. Secure connections, zero trust or continuously validating security, multi-factor authentication, and security as a service will all be important offerings in enabling security for remote workers. In terms of private sector investment, existing projects will be completed and paid for, but the timelines will be extended. In the longer term, increased focus will be on contactless solutions, biometrics, and remote access and authentication. The last point is that there will be a shift away from on-site consultations, as well as a shift from reliance on outside contractors to in-house personnel or remote service. And this is, again, to reduce face-to-face contact. The level of risk should be the primary influence on security decisions of businesses. It shouldn't be based on reactivity, but we are in a pandemic that has necessitated working from home for many of us, which is causing many companies to react, which is not wrong, it's necessary. But even the companies best equipped to handle the drastic shift in communication and server access have come across new issues with authentication. So the question is whether these security solutions being implemented now will fit future business needs after the pandemic. That's why it makes sense to find more use cases for existing and newly implemented solutions, as well as to diversify the point solutions in place in line with current needs. We will see a decline in industry-specific solutions and an expansion of solutions capabilities to fit multiple use cases. In terms of global partnership networks, many companies are recognizing the consequences of overhead costs of multiple localized offices. This may mean they shutter regional offices but don't exit the market, instead localizing their presence through local partners or distributors to save on overhead costs during the downturn. Partnership networks also can address manufacturing concerns, as we witnessed at the start of the year. We will also see a slow shift away from CapEx arrangements as the revenue disruptions from long-term CapEx agreements will move customers to embrace an OpEx model. Cost efficiency, performance management, software updates, and remote monitoring are the key tenets of an OpEx agreement. So in the short term, there is a focus on business continuity above all else, but the pandemic has revealed opportunities for security vendors in partnership and acquisition, market expansion through supply chain optimization, and through increasing the technical capabilities of existing solutions. So if we consider the opportunities for the security industry in the commercial sector, or if we think about it from the other side, what the commercial sector will require in the new normal. Right now and in the near term, sensors represent a great opportunity. providers and integrators should consider what sensors are in place already and how they can be utilized in new and relevant use cases. If you consider a building that has a surveillance system in place, can this same system be used to enforce social distancing or wearing masks? And related to this is modularity and security by design. This refers to a system that cannot be hacked and is able to be reconfigured and adapted for rapidly changing use cases. This means that it's easy to install, can meet needs immediately, and is still useful after COVID. An example of this could be a security provider retooling their analytics that are used for temperature sensing to be used for fever detection. The key in this time frame is using what a security vendor has in their product offerings and seeing how it can be used differently to meet current needs. Post-COVID or post-vaccine, what we're calling 2022 to 2024 about, opportunity for security lies in plug-and-play solutions for surveillance. Rather than very involved systems, end users will opt for modular or even temporary solutions. This speaks to the adoption of security as a service as well. For example, a convention center may opt to bring in security materials as needed, depending on the type of event, rather than installing permanent security flows. Or a city may move their security and surveillance equipment around based on analysis of incidents that informs where they're needed. In the long term, from 2024 onwards, we'll see the digitalization of legacy solutions. Old access control systems will feel obsolete and companies will have more cash available, so they will begin investing in modernizing these solutions. This is also when we expect to see the retooling of COVID-specific tools and a move to generic dashboarding. This is also related to multimodal and contactless solutions as well. And we'll see a continued move to biometric authentication. Finally, we will see a move to equality in terms of private-public partnerships. In the past, we saw that the private sector held advantage because it had the financial power. COVID has made public safety catch up technology-wise. So we'll see the public sector become more of a technology partner in the future on par with the commercial side. So what are the next steps? For building managers, property developers, and architects, it's important to consider the diversity of the solutions employed. Consider the providers that you partner with, not only in how they meet your needs today, but in how they approach future-proofing. And for security providers, enabling modular changes to existing products is the key to meeting current needs. To go back to sensors, this is a very important area to be conscious of. Sensors of all kinds, physical connected devices, access points, will remain in high demand from all customers, particularly those that can gather various types of data or provide multiple types of data analysis to meet differing operational requirements. Maintaining secure remote access is critical for both security providers and the end users. Contactless remote access and monitoring will be one of the key tenets for any security service agreement, both during the pandemic period and throughout recovery. Legacy CapEx style maintenance agreements typically don't offer these remote services. And if they do, then they charge additional fees. As a cost-saving measure, security as a service style agreements will be seen as a more viable service alternative. In terms of market movement, we can anticipate consolidation as a result of the economic period that we're in. So we can expect portfolio realignments, divestitures, and acquisition of point solutions as we move to recovery. And after a period of slow growth over the next few years, we can anticipate a growth trajectory that will rapidly bring the industry back to pre-pandemic levels. Because after all, security is an operational necessity. So that is all for me. If you have any questions or you want to know more about what we do, then you can always send me an email. But now we have time for, we have about 8 minutes for questions right now. Okay.
We have multiple questions actually. So
yeah. Okay. So how will financial services security be impacted by new technologies? One of the major new technologies that will impact the financial sector is biometrics. Biometrics authenticate if the person that was previously enrolled, it's already being used for ATMs to help authenticate, and there's some work on reading emotions or distress with AI that can be used to help identify customers that are under stress, and maybe that can prevent some theft. And we'll also move away from physical ATMs probably and cards. We already use our phones for a lot. We can authenticate ourselves on our devices. And so rather than authenticating ourselves to the bank, we are authenticating to our device that then can enable access to our accounts. So I believe that biometrics will be the key technology that will impact financial services, especially from the customer side for this point. What are the must-have technologies to secure buildings in the new normal? Modular and adaptable systems, being able to use the devices in place for various use cases, that's really important. This means using analytics like the security cameras being used for crowd management in spaces that might not have thought about crowd management before. Or I mentioned earlier about thermal cameras being used for fever detection. And if we think about post-COVID, again, biometric authentication is key for access control. There are many ways that biometrics are being implemented right now, but the overarching idea is to build in security by design in the devices and the systems employed, as well as in the development of buildings themselves through considering things like access control, surveillance and monitoring, and health and safety in the design and construction of buildings. Yeah, I think an interesting aspect of security is that it meets a concrete need and that it attempts to prevent harm in some way, but the perception of the people in the space is also important, like the number of security cameras in a space or the automatic lights that come on when you get close to a building. It creates a different response from the humans that interact with it. So the people that are tasked with designing the space that people live and interact in the new normal, it's important to consider how the environment impacts those within it and what the needs of the people in those spaces are. So you have to work with the security provider as well to find the best technologies to implement the level of security that you need, as well as the feeling of security that you need. How fast will security converge with other industries? This is already happening. We've seen security considerations implemented in the design of buildings for centuries, like from medieval moats to metal detectors to facial recognition by AI. But we see it in every industry. And not only that, but the convergence of physical and cyber systems, like we're seeing in the
スイラです。
すみ
ません。
So with the proliferation of like the Internet of Things, and that's highlighting new security challenges that bridge both the physical and digital world. So if we, like you can think about connected medical devices, wearables or implants or anything like that, or autonomous vehicles or autonomous agricultural machinery. These all require security considerations that are both physical and cyber. So convergence is already upon us and will rapidly continue until the digital and physical world are entirely interconnected, and that will happen in every industry. So security, both physical and cyber, will be an inherent consideration in any industry, essentially. Are scenarios 1 and 2 on the matrix page same? Yeah, they're the same scenarios defined on the earlier page. That is correct.